Hello, and it's welcome back to We Love Ugly Data, the Deep Analysis podcast. This is the 18th episode, or Series 3, Episode 8, if you're recording it or remembering it in that way. I don't. I've got it written on a Post-it note, or I forget. With me this time is Alan.
Hello.
Hello. So Alan's off to South America in a couple of days' time, so they're getting this recorded in before then. As you know, for those of you who've listened to this before or watched this before, depending on the medium, there is a format for this podcast. It's 30 minutes long. There are 3 topics. 3 topics, 30 minutes. We'll try to keep that the best we can. Sometimes those timings go out, but we want to try and keep this into some kind of, or therefore being probably the shortest conversation Alan and I ever have, because most of our conversations are way more than 30 minutes. This is actually a kind of a cut down. Let's get to the first of the topics, which is ta-da, new research. We published some new research this week, or last week actually. The format that used to be called Vendor Vignettes, that nobody called Vendor Vignettes. And although last week someone said to me, that's really interesting. Are you publishing a Vendor Vignette on them? So other people know the name and use the name. No one used the name, so we stopped using the name. And then sometimes we still use the name because we forget the name has changed. But that notwithstanding, there is some new search available for this time. So I thought we would go through those and just give you an idea of where they are. The first of them is the artist now known as Tungsten Automation, Alan, which has been around, as my dad would say, since God was a lad. And we will probably know better as Cognaize. And they've been through a bunch of different ownerships and have now got a new moniker. What can you tell us a little bit about Cognaize for people who don't know Cognaize?
Well, because Cognaize has indeed been around a very long time, best known sort of scanning software, whatever technology you want to use, and still generate a lot of their income from that. I mean, if you're into any kind of high volume, high throughput scanning, you'll probably see something from Cognaize in the mix. But as you say, it's private equity's been involved for a long time, a lot of acquisitions, big portfolio of products. So they've gone, and there's been a lot of change. We've written about some of those in our blog, actually. There's been changes there. So yeah, they've rebranded, focusing, well, as the name suggests, more on the sort of automation side. I'm going to be totally honest. I don't know everything that's going on there because, like I said, there's just a lot of products and a lot of things.
And to be fair, this is a question really. It would have been better lined up for Dan to answer.
It would absolutely be much. Have talked about this extensively, but the point is, they are still heavyweights in the industry. They absolutely are. And if you think about it this way, as Dan calls it, the fourth wave of IDP, they do have good software. But the reason I was saying in high volume, high throughput scanning, that's where you've traditionally seen them. Now the focus isn't really on the scanning, is it? I mean, because everybody can do that. The focus now is on the associated automation. What am I going to do with this captured information, this data? So so that they're adapting to the times, really, aren't they? They're adapting to the times. Indeed. And they've got the size to do that.
Indeed. And if people are listening to this and thinking, but surely there's no paper anymore, well, what is still full of paper? And indeed, we've got some research coming out soon with some actual data to suggest how much paper there still is in a lot of organizations. So yes, scanning is still a thing.
Yeah, and that's going to come as a shock to some people. It shouldn't come as a shock to people inside the industry, but it's a lot, right? And we've talked extensively, and we're just starting something on supply chain at the moment. I think so. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, right? The research we've just done, it's something around like half of business processes still involve paper or something. But if you went into supply chain, right,
be higher than that.
Way higher than that, I would imagine. We're going to find out.
Yes.
But gut feeling is way higher. I mean, that's an industry, group of industries really, that does everything with Excel spreadsheets and paper documents. So yeah,
So let's move on from Tungsten on Composable, which is kind of on the other end of the spectrum. Although Composable, when you and I both have spoken to a number of times, and the core of that organization is ex Nuxio, which is much closer, funnily enough, to the world of Kofax than Composable, which is very much in the world of helping organizations who are quite serious about using a variety of different large language models or specialist language models as they are also coming to the market to build their own in-house AI-based applications, but needing really a kind of management layer in order to be able to manage, in the first case, how do you manage building prompts such that you can apply them to different LMMs, so having the kind of translation layer in there, be able to plug in different models as you want, running synthetic models, running A/B and multivariate testing against models. So really it's for organizations who are very serious about doing this, very serious about doing it themselves in-house, and basically need the management tooling that, because this is still a kind of a nascent market, hasn't really existed so far. So that's kind of Composable. I will put in the show notes for this. You can actually, via Composable, read this VV themselves. Composable have kindly provided access to that. I will provide details in the show notes so you can get that. Or if you can't wait for that and you're watching this before the show notes have come out, go to Composable's website and you can find that yourself. So that's Composable. Cognaize. Now, Dan and I spoke kind of a little bit about Cognaize in the last pod, because he was using them as an example of vendors that hide in plain sight a little bit, and if you're only looking at the top right hand corner, you'll miss out on a vendor like Cognaize, which is not just IDP but quite specialist, I think, in the sort of the sort of financial services and financial results scanning. I don't know whether you know anything more about Cognaize that you can add in here, Alan.
Don't really, to be honest.
Well, that's fair enough. That's very much more a dad thing. I'm just dropping IDP things on you, like you know everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to go back to last month's podcast, Dan and I spoke about Cognaize as an example. Obviously, we've published various bits and pieces. I will put I'll put links into the show notes, a little bit about back to that sort of hiding in plain sight stuff that Dan and I talked about last time. So another venerable vendor, the last of the four that we've published, is iGrafx. And iGrafx have been around since the 1990s as kind of process tooling. Again, I think it's a vendor that we've both spoken to, and another one of those, a little bit like Kofax, who've had, it's not a tortured history. If you are a software company and you've been around since the 90s, it's unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely you've gone through that period without taking money, having some private equity investment, possibly being sold, possibly being spun in and spun out of various other ownerships. And iGrafx is no different from Tungsten Automation in that respect. But probably it only came into our purview a little bit when they acquired a French process mining vendor called Logpicker, I think about 3 years ago. In fact, if you look at the press release for iGrafx acquisition of Logpicker, it's got an extensive and glowing quote from Alan Pell Sharp on it.
Yeah, because like I'm the expert on everything. But I do remember speaking to them. Yeah, I think it's about 4 years ago. They were one of the first actually because we, to the best of my knowledge, we were the first analyst firm to start covering task and process mining. And so we got a report out. It's going to be at least 4 years ago.
Yeah,
and that was one of the first notable acquisitions. It was sort of like this stuff's going places. And it is. I notice on the screen that I can see here, if you're watching on YouTube, we still apparently do call them vignettes. But
yes,
apparently we still do. I didn't know that. But no, iGrafx has been around a long time. I mean, there's just so many interesting things. And again, we're doing a lot of survey research, and we've again, interesting stuff there. And I'm sure iGrafx will be very interested in it too, in as much as more people are using process mining for big AI projects than we thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like twofold. It's one, more people are actually taking the idea of process analysis seriously, right? So that's the big group, and that's quite a big group. But actually, quite a large percentage of that big group are using specific software to help them, and a large portion of that is process mining. Now, those of you who've listened or watched to this podcast for all of the 18 episodes, you deserve a medal, frankly. But also, you'll be aware that one, we've been banging the drum for this software, and two, we've also saying repeatedly, it's a bit of a slow burn, but it's going to happen. There's a little bit of a slow. So maybe it is going to be one piece of research. You know, we'll see the data soon. Maybe this is showing that we're past I don't know, some kind of tipping point that actually, when people are taking these processes seriously, they're starting to take the infrastructure seriously to launch them.
Yeah, it's difficult to know. I mean, the reality is that's why we're doing surveys at the moment, right? Because you know, we talk to a lot of systems integrators, talk to a lot of vendors, whatever. We talk to lots of people, and that's really rich information and data. But sometimes you just have to go out and ask a heck of a lot of people who are essentially at the proverbial coalface. And every time you do, you learn something you didn't know before. And I was genuinely surprised at the numbers on process mining. I thought it would have been much lower.
Yeah, so the last one there is iGrafx. They've actually got, if you want to dig into the information about them, they've actually got kind of technical partnerships with actually one or two other vendors in the place that we also cover, Scan being one of those that they've got a partnership with, and they're very much big into that kind of digital twin of the organization, so organizational modeling and stuff. Anyway, you want to learn more? Read the vendor vignette. If you don't have access to them, get in touch and we could discuss how you can get access to those. Those of you who are new to those, we put these out in little batches 4 times a year normally. It's normally 4 or 5 different vendors. A mix of new, by new I mean new vendor vignettes and updated ones, and vendors which are new and less new as well. I think probably what we've just shown you is a reasonable cross section of those. So that's onto the second topic of the day, which is we're in the summer. You may see it's a bit hot for me in the UK. We don't have aircon, so I look a bit shiny. It's because I'm generally a bit shiny. It's a bit warm down here in the south of the UK. But I thought it was a reasonable time to do a little bit of a kind of catch up, wash up, state of play, a little bit around generative AI and data. Now, those of you who followed us for a while will know it's actually the and data where we get kind of interested in generative AI as a kind of professional interest. As technologists, we're interested in general, but it's really the intersection of AI and the data which supports it, which is kind of our sweet spot a little bit. And funny enough, I think now, as of sort of today, I'm in my 3rd year now at Deep Analysis, which is flown by, and it's almost the discussions that Alan and I are having about how to build coverage when I first started were, yeah, this LMM things are coming along. We think they might be quite big, and with a few months, they were everywhere. And so quite quickly, it kind of predominated not just the specific coverage around that, but every area around it. Dan's IDP area being a perfect example, it just blows up everywhere. Where it started to get a little bit interesting for us, and I pulled this blog post up, which is a post from November 2023. So a year on from that, really, called AI with a 2-track mind, where I had been on a briefing recently, and the quote that's on the screen that says, speaking to a group of analysts recently, a product marketer for one of those vendors at the forefront of generative AI app assistant suggested that without the use of real business data to back it, the technology in enterprise terms is largely a parlor trick. And that's a verbatim quote, which is something we agree with, right? So that at that point in the kind of generative AI story, which is not even a year ago, was the point when everybody who was starting to launch the things that we now broadly think of as co-pilots was saying, look, they're really interested, but without the data, they don't do anything. Now, of course, another piece of work that we do regularly is we spend time really listening to what's going on in the systems integrator and customer worlds. So people who are either selling and integrating or buying and integrating this technology. And this first kind of period of you've got to start backing it with your data created some interesting challenges. And the primary challenge that we were hearing from integrators particularly was as soon as customers started to go, great, well, let's throw all of our data into this, they started to hit a kind of security and compliance wall, which was, ooh, when we said all of the data, we don't want all the employees to be able to see all of this stuff, right? And it turns out when we started to do, started to actually say to let's say I kind of some sort of ingestion bot, go and grab all the content. It turns out it's got access to a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't realize it actually had. So a lot of those early ones, the things are happening around this period where, we started to do the getting all of our data and joining it together with the Copilot. We're having to pause now because we've got a big compliance problem. Is that, you were hearing that kind of stuff too, right, Alan?
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, it is compliance, it is security, it is data quality.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of things going on here. But just to blow our own trumpet, when, and we've had disagreements internally here because this has been a huge thing, and it's good, healthy thing. Generative AI did indeed blow up, what with, ChatGPT and OpenAI and everything.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we wrote about this. I'm going to have to fact check myself here, but I'm pretty sure about 18 months ago about the need for SLMs, small language models, right?
Yeah.
And which basically like, that's cool, but I need this to run on my data. And there's a logic behind that. So terms like RAG are now popular parlance in the tech industry, right? The thing is, we've gone through this explosion of interest in generative AI. It's not going away. It's not that's not the point here. It's that it needs to be used in a much more controlled, secure, and accurate manner. That's just logical. That makes sense, right? Turns out that's actually really hard to do.
Yep.
Really hard to do. And the work's now getting started, but it's not going to be finished in a week.
Well, indeed. So, and I still dip into those conversations with those customers and with those SIs who are doing those projects. And what's happened as a result of that first, those first attempts to start bolting your enterprise data onto these is that integrators and vendors, but typically this is fallen to integrators, have started to build their own onboarding program. So the first part of the onboarding program is data wrangling. Now, we all knew that would be the thing that would have to be done first, but actually butting up against it has meant that actually the first thing that's happening is a large audit process. And that was kind of interesting. We're moving, for those of you who are looking on screen now, through to a blog post we wrote in March 2019, Models on the RAG Trade, which is only 6 months after that previous one we wrote, where we started to say we're actually almost into now. I say it's that long ago. It's only this spring. It's not that long ago. We're into kind of like the 5 ages of the massive models. And as Alan was saying, we weren't the only people to do it, but we were amongst the first group of people saying, hey, actually, for real enterprise needs, these large language models, as interesting and fun and exciting as they are, aren't really going to crack it because they don't have the precision and the accuracy required to do the kind of tasks that have a value, right? And that's an important thing. Does the task have a value? And it needs to have the precision. So,
and they cost no fortune.
And your $30 a month as your starting point per seat starts to mount up quite quickly. So these five ages of the massive models that came around, and I got it on the screen, but I'll read it out for those people who aren't who are listening rather than watching. Is that the first stage was, hey, massive models that know everything that can perform every task you throw at them. Try and see. And we all remember that from the, hey, here's ChatGPT, ask it a question, see the result, isn't it interesting? And be fair, at the same time, there are also the kind of initial image generators that were also around at that same point. That kind of led to step 2, which is, okay, the massive models only know a certain amount, and you're probably going to want to pair them with a human to check their responses, right? But still, wow. So that was the first point when we started to go, well, obviously, for enterprise things, we want human in the loop here. Human in the loop became very much, everything was, well, every diagram had kind of like a robot, and then there would be a human in it. And we said, actually, well, you had to have a human in the loop for that. The third stage was like, well, right. So if you want a precise response, you're going to need to use your own data as well as the massive models to make that happen. So that was the process that we started there. But obviously, by the time we're getting into the early part of this year, everyone was then going, well, of course, it's RAG. RAG is the thing which is going to save us here. It's going to use your enterprise data up front so that you can populate really, really big prompts, really accurate prompts that also became really big, which is kind of another issue. But you're going to start to then build these wonderfully complicated prompts so you can give the LLM so much detail that it can't give you a kind of a bad answer. But of course, that gives you the same problem, which is problem 4 here, which is, that also means you need a good handle of your data. So maybe the solution here is to put this into search, and therefore long-standing information management professionals at that point fell off their stools and went, oh, so it's a search problem, is it? We don't have to bore you again with knowing all the problems that come along with large federated search projects, but they don't necessarily have a long-standing relationship with being super successful or being great career building prospects for individuals. Now that the 5 step to that was, right, well, now search has fixed everything in Gaffer. You only need to ask the massive model to assemble the response. So you don't need to ask the massive model very often. You can do that using your internal data. So we went from, hey, the massive model to fix everything, step 5, which, well, whatever you do, don't ask the massive model anything. The massive model can't help you with anything here. And that happened in a really short period of time.
It did, and a lot, it's almost impossible to know for sure, but there's a lot of what you might call traditional AI, which has been trained very, very well on specific data set or whatever. That's now labeled generative AI. It's not. It's just traditional AI. And I think what we're going to see is, certainly over the next year to 2 years, a re-emergence of the fact that Gen AI isn't actually the only option. There's lots of ways of using AI, much more cheaply, much more accurately, that doesn't involve LLMs at all. Because all of those other options have just sort of got drowned out the conversation.
Well, and then if you start to dig, and obviously, if you want to get into the real technical weeds of how these things come together, we're not necessarily the people to talk to. There are experts that do that. We have a very specialist bent in this area of understanding enough to understand the implications of the data management piece, which, as we've seen here, has become increasingly important very, very quickly in it. But if you start to look at, the underlying embedding models here, and they're really important for this whole vector search thing that you feed it into. How are those embedding models created? Well, they're created with the kind of previous generation, I guess you think of ML-based learning techniques in order to build the embeddings that allow you to go, actually, what is similar to what is like something else? And that's fundamentally, which is, the bit underneath, which is RAG is working on. So, everything is always built on the generations of the foundations of previous generations of technology, right? And we've kind of seen that a little bit when we've been talking today about previous vendors. I want to move on just slightly. I was with UiPath last month at their London conference. There's kind of 2 UiPaths out there at the moment. There's UiPath as seen by investors, and then there's UiPath that's seen by technologists and analysts, right? And if you're asking investors, oh, it's terrible, they're missing what they expect to do on stock. They're missing what they're expecting to do on individual little financial pieces that are part of their results, right? And if that's your interest, then probably look away now. If you're actually looking at what the company is doing technologically, and actually in terms of what they're doing in terms of their broad earnings, they're actually doing quite well.
And not just Automation Anywhere is doing pretty. I mean, the reality is that whole RPA thing, right? It's still there, right? Analysts aren't interested in it anymore. They think it's boring. But the reality is, people are only, I would argue, only just getting started implementing bots, and their strategies are pretty good, and frankly, the technology works well.
Yeah, so. and they've I've got up on screen for people who are watching this, and I'll put it into the show notes. A piece that I wrote on there about UiPath finding a balance between the robotic and the agentic. And if you're new to agentic, it is the word du jour around. UiPath are calling it robot process automation, but basically it's adding kind of initially generative AI, but in the future in kind of from large language models to what they refer to as large action models, So understanding the actions that are likely to take place and bolting those into process automation. And there's more details here. It is very much a kind of mega trend, if you like, from the people who brought you previously, hyper automation, and now talking very seriously about agentic. We're not big on mega trends. We're very much more big on mega reality. And the good thing about mega reality is it doesn't change anywhere near as much as you think it does. So
I think that, I mean, I was very impressed both with UiPath and Automation Anywhere at that conference earlier this year in Austin. I think the strategy is really good. I think what they're working towards is really good, right? But the problem with terms like agentic and the hyper automation stuff is that they appeal to investors.
Yeah.
They appeal to the media. It's really, really hard to get this stuff going, and there's like we talked about with AI and data, there's a lot of groundwork you need to do before you can even go down this path. So they're not doing anything wrong. Well, I mean, investors think that. I don't think they're doing anything wrong. It's just this is a long journey they're on.
Yeah, and I think you basically cut through the thing that I didn't say in the piece that was in the back of my mind, was how much of what I was seeing and writing that's very interesting was not a dance for me, and it wasn't a dance for customers. It was a dance for institutional investors to say, hey, we get it, and this is what the future looks like. So, don't expect to be seeing large action models, suddenly appearing in these products anytime soon. Although, on a theoretical basis, aside from the fact there's a whole other data problem with large action models, we can park for another time. There's a huge greenfield opportunity still out there for RPA and process automation in general. There's still a huge way for that to go before we go, hey, you know what? We've run out of runway. Now we need the robots to do something more advanced.
Years and years away.
Years and years. So GenAI and data, an update. It's an update. It's not a final story. We're about to head into conference season. I know you're off to Dreamforce fairly soon. It's in a couple of weeks until that, isn't it? So there's going to be lots of things happening, and I'm sure lots of updates. But one thing I wanted to make sure we updated last time, Dan and I did a vendor briefings, definitely do's and definitely don'ts. And the previous before, Alan and I had done a conference presentations, definitely do's and definitely don'ts. But I know that the unsolicited advice to vendor briefings got a bit more pickup, and I realised that no one out of the three of us has sat through more briefings than Alan, and therefore it shouldn't just be the advice that Dan and I gave. Up on the screen is something that Alan wrote for link on LinkedIn, and I thought what we'll try and do is we'll get some of this advice together and actually put it out into a blog post rather than making people listen to the podcast. Albeit it's only 30 minutes of time. So for those of you who weren't here last time or have forgotten what the advice that Dan and I came up with, the setup here was basically we will allow one definite do and one definite don't. This was not an opportunity for ranting. This was very much a one do and one don't. For every negative had to be a positive, or for every positive had to be negative. Depends whether you're a cloud lining or a cloud person. So far, the kind of positive we had was definitely do's. Dan's was he loves case studies and references. He wants as many real case studies and references as possible, and he thinks that's really, really important. Not just telling people what you do, but how you do it, and specifically who you do it for, and there's results. Again, most people do that, but it tends to be something that tends to be, well, just here's a time check. We've got 3 minutes left, so let's run through the case studies without breathing. That tends to be the setup. Whereas maybe move those slides to the front of the deck. Maybe that's an idea. Mine was kind of a spin on that, which was actually I'm very much into the implementation. How long does it take? Tell me about the phases. What does the customer have to bring? What do you bring? Do you do with partners? How does that work? So what's the reality of the day after the marriage? What does the life look like? That was kind of my positive. Before we get into the negative ones, Alan, what would you add? What would be the one that you would add into that list of definite do's for vendor briefings?
Definitely. Well, now this is sort of unique. I don't know if it's unique, but it's sort of unique, if that makes sense. Ask us questions. I mean,
Ask
make it
questions.
conversational, right? Let's, if it's sort of picked up in your don't, right, do the same demos everybody, right? If you're just rattling through a bunch of talking points, I mean, why not just record it and send us a recording? Actually chat to us, ask, look, we're not going to give you hours and hours and hours of free consulting, but we do actually appreciate that you've set this up, you've dedicated time to it. And where we can, we will answer your question. Now, that's very different to some of the larger analyst firms who are not allowed to do that under any circumstances.
Yeah, we don't make you fill a spreadsheet in either. We're nice.
No, make you fill a spreadsheet. We actually genuinely want to get to know. We had a great brief. Actually, it turned into two, didn't it? It was a follow-up.
Oh, yes, yes.
Search Unify. That was an example of a good briefing. We actually chatted with them. We asked them questions. They asked us questions. They explained where some of these projects are really hard. They actually, I mean, they were honest with us, and you just come out of that with a much more, as an analyst, with a much more positive feeling, right? So if somebody was to say, who would you recommend? Those are the kind of people you want to recommend, because you think, okay, these people are on the ball. They know what they're doing, and they're honest about the challenges. So yeah, ask us questions, be interactive. Don't just rattle through your talking points.
Less slides, more chat.
Absolutely.
More conversation. Okay, that's good. That's a good one. We'll add that to the list of definite do's. Let's just run through the definite don'ts. Now, Dan's one last time was, don't show me the same demo as everybody else. He said he didn't want to see any more IDP demos that involve invoices. He's like, I pretty much understand you do invoices. I feel his pain here, right? I've not seen one of those demos, and already I didn't want to see another one just from his description. Mine, and it was a very personal one, and I was on a briefing, a group briefing with analysts. There were analysts from 14 other companies on this briefing this week, and they extensively called out 2 of those analyst firms and went into great details about things that they'd published, therefore alienating everybody else from that room, who I guarantee at that point was not listening to a word they said about it. It's not that we don't know. Nobody spends more time looking at the output of analysts than other analysts, right? We know what they're publishing. We know exactly what they're doing. We don't need to be told. Sorry, I'm turning into this isn't an explanation bit, not doing the bit again. But yeah, don't talk about the outputs of analyst companies. Don't talk about what other analysts think of them. We don't care. We absolutely don't care. It's a turn off. So what was your primary don't to add to this list, Alan?
Well, it doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, it's incredibly frustrating when I get it that they've given up time and then they want to talk to us, and I always respect that, but we're doing the same thing, right? So we're giving up our time and making an effort. And when you have a briefing that is essentially all under non-disclosure, there's no end embargo date, what's the point? I can't ever talk about this to anybody. So I can't write about this. So I mean, that gets my back up when that happens, right? Now, because that's not actually a briefing. That's an advisory call. Let's keep this all under NDA. Can you give us some feedback? Is this a good idea or not, or whatever, right? But when you corral a bunch of analysts together and say, oh, and you can't talk about this, so why are you telling us?
Yeah, and I think there's certainly, and I'm not going to mention them by name. There is one very large technology company which certainly figures a lot in my research. Like, why do I never mention them? Why do I never write about them? Don't I get briefed by them? Oh, I get briefed by them, and I got briefed by them for years. And every single briefing is under a ending NDA, to the point where I'm kind of like doing it as a hobby. It's like, it's nice to know what they're doing. I can't tell anybody about it, write about it, or use it in any advisory work. It can't appear in any research. I'm like, this is purely just a piece of entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, the other one for me is, and this is just very quickly, but it's, this, I don't want to throw out any shade to anybody, right? But analyst relations is actually a profession. It's one I have immense respect for. Oh my God, I wouldn't want to do that job.
It's not something you can do as a hobby. It is a practice.
You cannot do it as a hobby. And briefings that are set up by somebody who isn't an analyst relations professional typically are not good.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, we're doing all these great things, you should write about it. And as soon as you ask a question, they're on the defense. It's just like, do it properly. Even if you're a small vendor, and I'm going to name check a few. I mean, Starlight, Ludovic, right? He's I wish I'd written down the names now. There's a bunch of them out there who do this as a fractional thing.
Yeah,
right?
Kia are quite good as well. They do a lot of European vendors. Yeah.
And Robin Schaefer. There's a bunch out there. You don't need a massive budget, but do analyst relations properly, or don't do it.
There you go. That's a perfect way to do analyst relations properly, or don't do it. That's it. That's how I've got time for. I massively overran. So that's why we're a bit tight for time at the end of it. So thank you for joining us, Alan, and enjoy your time in South America.
Yeah, it's a tough life. So I'll be hanging out in Copacabana Beach, speaking in Rio on the 20th. I think that's the Tuesday. I'm not sure.
By the time, I'll tell you what we'll do. So by the time this goes out, you'll be there. Next time, let's talk a little bit about Brazil, because it's a really fascinating market and very different to people who don't have the exposure to it than you might realize.
Fascinating place, and I'm hoping to come back with a lot of great stuff from it.
Awesome. So next time, 3 more topics, one of which will be about Brazil, and 30 minutes to discuss them in. Thank you for joining us, and we'll speak to you soon.
Bye.